Okay, so I've got my Flutter app open. This builds off the last video of my grocery list showing, and I have two routes. I showed how to create the second route and how to navigate to it in the previous video. And in this video, we're going to look at how to put arguments into that navigation process so that we can actually pass data from one screen to the next. Okay, so I have my app open. Again, this was all developed in the last series of videos if you're watching from home. And I'm going to go over here to the documentation. I also have this open. This is the Flutter cookbook for navigation and passing arguments. Specifically, I'm looking at passing arguments to a named route because my routes have names. And I haven't done this before using this approach at all, but I'm going to just do this on the fly and try to learn from the documentation in real time while I'm making the video and see how it works. So it looks like they're making some arguments here to pass. I don't know why they're doing this. It appears that they make a class with two properties in it, and it looks like they're just going to pass that from one screen to the next. They're going to instantiate one of these and pass it. Okay, I'm not sure why they're doing that. Let's see, create a widget that extracts the arguments. Okay, so this is the second widget. Yep. Register the widget in the routes table. We've talked about the routes table before. That's this thing over here. And when you create the material app, the routes table, that's this right here. All right, I have two routes, slash and slash screen 2. And these are this process of defining these two things is called registering the routes in the routes table, in case you didn't pick up on that from the last video. And let's see. So that's done. They have a strange route name. It's actually not a string like mine. It's just a string. It's either slash or slash screen 2. It looks like they have a variable here, which must be defined somewhere. Let's see if we go up. Yeah. Okay. Oh, that comes from here. Look at that. Okay. So they're defining something called a static variable, sometimes referred to as a class variable, and it depends on what language you're working in. That may be a concept that's unfamiliar to you. If you're a hardcore Java programmer, you know very well what the static keyword means. When you have a static variable, to access it, you type the name of the class and then dot and the name of the variable. So that's different than the properties associated with a class. When you make different instances from a class, each one of those instances has a set of variables associated with it. Those are called the properties, or sometimes the instance variables, or even the attributes. This is different than that. This is just a variable that's associated with the class name itself. And in order to declare that, to make it such, you call it static. So that's what they're doing here. This is the string that they want to name the root. So this is equivalent to my slash screen 2 that you see over here up at the top. Right? That's all that is. I think that makes this documentation a little more confusing. I'm not going to bother with any of that. But this is their second screen. So this is their screen 2, and it looks like it inherits from stateless widget. Okay, mine inherits from stateful widget, and I have my class, my state class associated with it, but who cares? We're going to just adapt all of this to work. It looks like the key line for extracting arguments is this one right here. We need to call a method known as modal route .of context, and then the dot settings .arguments. This looks like it will extract the arguments for us and store them in here. And this is a data type. So here's the variable, right, that this is stored in, and this is the data type screen arguments, which is defined here because they're using a class to put their arguments inside of, which again makes it more complicated. I have a list that I want to pass back and forth between the two routes. So mine's going to look a little different. Right, but I think I understand it. And let's see, alternatively extract. I don't care about alternatively. We don't care about that. And then it looks like when we push to the new screen, so when we do navigator.push name context, this is just like what I had before. This is my slash screen 2, right? But they just have that static variable. And then look, there it is. It looks like we're given an arguments property, and we can just put something after that. And in my case, I'm going to want to put the grocery list, the actual array after this thing here, but they just put their screen arguments. They just call a constructor right here, right? Because they're just constructing something from this class type, right? They're just instantiating right there on the fly and passing that in as the argument. So I think this is a little confusing. I'm going to do this a little more simplistically to make it easier to understand. All right, I'm going to remove that for now and come back to here. So the first thing is, let's see, my app is running. Here it is. We're good. All right, I have that off screen just so you can see the code that I'm typing, but I'll call it back when we need it. So the first thing I'm going to do is we either have to write it in the receiving class or the sending class. So let's write the receiving class first. Let's do that. So here I am in my second page down here, and in my widget build method, let's see, they have, let's go back, register the widget in the routes table, create a widget to extract the arguments. So it looks like what they do is they just create, so I'm just going to copy that line right there, right before their scaffold. So right at the top of the build method, I'm just going to paste that in there. And it's not going to be a screen argument variable type. It's going to be something very, very different. So come up, I want to make sure I am using a list, I believe. Let's see, if I get it from either class, it's what do I want to pass over? I want to pass over this. It's a list of string called groceries. It's a list of strings. Okay, so that's what we're going to put, list string, like that. And I certainly don't have to call it args. I could call it list or groceries. Yeah, that's nicer. And yeah, that should be okay. It just says the value is not used, but that's all right. I'm going to leave that alone. Sorry for the it's noisy in the background today. That's my dog, obviously. All right. Yeah. Here we go. So, okay, I think I have that all set up. And I'm not sure what I'm going to do with that when I get there, when I push to this route. But actually, it's interesting to see what would happen if I now tried to access this. I wonder what it'll do. Probably nothing. I just hot reloaded the app or restarted or whatever you want to call it. Let's see what happens when I go there. Yeah, nothing happens, and that's good. I wondered if there'd be a problem, but there really shouldn't be. I just tried to extract arguments when, in fact, there are none, because I haven't pushed any from the main screen over to there. So this is probably null right now. Like, for example, if I were to say print groceries, it would probably say null, because there aren't any arguments. Let's do a quick refresh here, and let's go over there. Yeah, there it is. Look at that, right down there at the bottom, Flutter null. So it's behaving just like I anticipated, which is it's always nice when that happens. All right, let's go back to the first class right here, where I actually have, this is my first screen. I actually have access to this, and it's called groceries over here too. Yeah, all right. So let's go down to where I actually do the push to the second route, which is going to be in my floating action button right down here. Here it is, navigator.push named. So here are my arguments: context, screen2, that's the name of it, and then I think I get to use arguments as I forget, let's see, it's my property. Let's go over to here, register the widgets and navigate to the widget. Yeah, arguments is I just get to put that in as a named parameter, and then what I want, whatever I want to pass after it, arguments. Boy, could this be any easier? Arguments, groceries, because that's what I'm passing over. And there's really nothing else to do, because the routes are already named and they're already in the table, and this is all a lot simpler than I think this documentation would have you believe. I'm not sure why they made it so complicated. I think probably the reason that they did this, where they defined a class to stick their text arguments inside and send. I think they wanted to prove a point. They were trying to show you that you can pass an object as an argument. You can pass a custom class to the second screen as your argument. You don't have to just pass a string or something like that. So maybe that's why they did it. But as often happens with documentation and with examples, sometimes in their zeal to be complete as possible, they end up being more confusing than helpful. So let's see. I don't know. You know what? It's perfectly good documentation. I just learned from it, and you can too, and there's nothing wrong with it. You just have to spend a little time trying to sift through what they're doing. All right, let's see what happens when, let's see, I go back. Let's see what happens when I push. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Look at that. I'm at the second screen, and it's printing the list of groceries. That's coming from my print statement, which I put right here. That's what that is. So it got it. It means the argument has arrived in scope in the second screen. That's really easy. In fact, that's easier than I thought it would be to pass the arguments back and forth. So, okay, great. Now we could do something with this while we're in this location. And I could, for example, I have a list view ready to go. And so I could then iterate through this list here, and I could populate this list view with all of the elements that are in that list and make tiles for them. Now, why would I want to do that? That defeats the whole purpose of the app, because that's what the first screen is for. Right? No, you wouldn't be interested in doing that. So now that I'm thinking about it, right, I'm at the point, I've gotten to the point where I realize that the navigation in this app is upside down. It shouldn't be this way. The way it should work is this screen that you're looking at right now should have some functionality like create new list, save list, name list. This should be the screen where you actually create the groceries array. And then, so this should probably be the home screen. We should open to this. And then we should have some kind of action button where we click and it pushes us to this as our second route. Maybe what you do is you click on the you click on the route. I'm sorry, you click on the, imagine there's a individual grocery lists on this page. You click on the list you want, and then it takes you to that particular list here, and it expands, and then it shows you all of the contents of that list. But the contents are saved from here. So this page makes the arrays and is responsible for interacting and storing those, saving the array somewhere else, which could be to the cloud, local storage. So this kind of thing happens all the time. You're developing something and you get a little bit into it and you realize, oh man, it's backwards. I really want to do it the other way around. You have to go back and refactor your code, and I think that's a good thing. So I'm at that point where now I can see a little more clearly that I want to restructure this app so that this is my landing page when it loads, and I can create my lists for my different grocery stores, and I can save the list, make a new list, name it, and then when I click on that list, it'll go into it, and I can add individual items, okay? And then whether or not you have to go back to this screen to save it is up to you. You can also implement a save right from here. There are different ways to, that's a design philosophy. All right. So in fact, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to make that your assignment as well. So if you're watching from my class, then I'll write that assignment up. That'll be the homework, and I'll put some details for you to follow along with this video. All right. Before I wrap it up, I just want to say a couple things about the nature of how we're passing arguments back and forth between the two different screens or routes. So, the first time I saw this way of doing it was years ago with iOS development, and then later with Android development. And it always struck me, at least in the beginning, as kind of hackish. I don't know, I was uncomfortable with this idea that I was just going to make this pipeline between these two different classes and just send the data to, back and forth. It just didn't feel right. And you probably have the same sense for it, because if you've been steeped in a Java development environment, which many of you, if you're watching from my class at Staples High School, you have been sort of taught in that paradigm with your previous courses in processing with Java and AP computer science and such, then this idea feels a little bit foreign to you. I mean, what you would do, you're more at home with the idea of making some type of global variable. So up here, somewhere up here at the top of my code, I can put it up here if you want, you would be more inclined to do something like make a list of string called groceries and declare that variable there in global scope. And then you would have access to it everywhere from inside every class. You could do whatever you want with that. You could just, hit groceries and manipulate the contents of it from within the different classes. And while that's a popular approach in Java, it's not something that we often do in mobile development. We sort of avoid global variables like some sort of disease. We just kind of avoid them. And there are reasons for that, right? But let me just to prove that this does work, so you see it's not so mysterious. And if, again, you're following along from my class, then you've been doing this for a couple of years in the environments we've been working in. So if I were to just right now declare a variable called number globally, and I'll set it equal to 5, then from within either of these classes in here, I just have access to that. Just so just to prove that, what I'll do is inside this build method, when we actually go to the second screen and the widgets get built, I'm just going to do a print number right from there. And I'll just comment out this grocery print so that you don't get confused. And let's go take a look. Okay, so here's the app. It's been reloaded. So here we go. We'll go to the next screen, and look, there it is. It printed 5 down there at the bottom of my screen. And I could do the exact same thing inside the other class. So yeah, I could put my grocery list like that and have access to it if I wanted. But I don't want to do that. And I mentioned this in a previous video. I mentioned the idea that in the early days of mobile development, and this is when I first encountered this methodology of doing things this way, memory was scarce and it was precious, right? You didn't have you had devices that had a limited amount of memory in them, and in order to conserve your usage of that memory, you had a process that was relatively new called garbage collection. And what that is that's something that happens. The runtime environment of an OS manages this process. And what happens is when you have variables that are pointing to memory locations that are no longer needed in a particular scope, then that memory can be wiped away. It can be freed to be used for something else. That's the technical term for that is garbage collection. And most mobile app environments were built with a runtime garbage collector to handle that. And this idea of passing data from screen to screen plays nicely into that, because if you move to a new screen, you just pass over what you need at that screen. You don't pass over everything, just what you need. And then the rest of the contents of memory that were being used to define widgets and or views, whatever you want to call them, on your first screen is wiped clean, because you don't need a lot of that data anymore. It's just not needed. So why keep the memory? Why keep it in memory if you don't need it? You're going to need that memory to do some other things now in your new screen. So there's this idea of kind of, you build something and then you clean it all up and you just take from it the few things you need and you bring them with you to the next room and you do what you do, and then you come back and you bring with you what you need, and you're always constantly cleaning up and freeing up memory. And that's how you work in an environment with limited memory. Nowadays, our iPhones and our Android devices are imbued with so much memory that we kind of forget. I mean, it's still much less than on an average laptop, right? But you forget that. And so this design philosophy that's grown up with mobile development might be a little bit foreign to you. I don't know. All right, so that's one really good way of handling it. Now, I'm not saying that we never do global spaces. And I mentioned in a past video that there are various ways to do this. You can sort of take the things that you want to have in every single screen, and instead of passing them back and forth, you can store them in some kind of local storage. You can definitely do that, whether you use a little preferences area or you use an SQLite database to do it, fine. And then each screen has access to that stored data from that, that way. Yes, that's also a viable approach to doing something. And when you would do that is if the only data that you really wanted to have available on multiple screens was the stuff that you knew you were going to store permanently anyway, then why not? Right? If you have some core storage space that's associated with the app on the device, and you need data to persist in that place, then sure, do that, right? Put the data there, and then you just grab access to it from each and every screen that you go to. That's fine. But for other things that aren't necessarily persistent when the app quits, those things you just want to pass back and forth between your screens. Now, it's arguable that the grocery list, is something that I want to persist. So you could make the argument that passing the list back and forth is not necessarily the best way to do it because you're going to end up having to store that anyway. But for the time being, there is no harm in passing it back and forth. I've also mentioned in past videos the concept of a provider and a data stream as another way to get something into all classes to make it available. And that's generally something that's a little bit more advanced, and you have to have a real reason for wanting to do that. A lot of people run to that right away as their global space. But as always, with anything global, be it global variables in a Java program, whatever, you have to have a really good reason for using them. The general rule of thumb is avoid global variables at all costs. When you need them, fine, but you better have a good reason. You better be able to defend it if you're using them. All right. So having said that, I'm going to finish this up, and I'll post an assignment for those of you watching from my class that will involve kind of doing what I said before about inverting the workflow in this app and adding the ability to create lists and then go to the list to put the things in it. All right. Great. Thanks for watching.